board study session for the board. We do have a quorum here. And the adoption of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda? The agenda then is adopted as presented. And we will now turn our meeting over to Kristen Miles. Hi, Chris.
Hi, good to see you, everybody. Thank you for having me. I know we've got some abbreviated time tonight, so we're going to jump in. I'm going to go and share my screen. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. Okay, good. You should be seeing my screen. Hold on. Do you see anything yet?
Yes, we see it. The view is kind of small with you on the side, but we can see it.
All right, hold on. Let's see.
Oh, I forgot that. Oh, goes off.
See.
Is that any better?
Oh, yeah, they're gonna do the six.
You may want to change, I don't know if you need to change your settings
Sounds like
or
something I would need to
hopefully
do.
you can see what I'm showing. That's how it's showing up in my presenter view.
Can you guys see that okay? Or
Yeah.
Yeah, we can see it okay. Yeah, you're good.
Okay, okay, great. We're gonna do a bit of an abbreviated board governance essentials tonight. So we're just gonna jump in, and we'll do this in light of the fact that like you're working on your strategic plan, want to talk about the board's best practices and role in impacting student outcomes. And we'll do that through a little bit of scenario building and some other things. So we're going to talk about, and if I'm looking over here, because my screen's over here, high-performing boards and some of these standards, actually all of the standards in the model that we teach from called Balanced Governance. We'll practice through some scenarios. I will talk about some tools for collaboration that we recommend, and then any questions that you have at the end. So why does the board matter? You are really the nexus between the community and the district, right? Of course you represent the community, you represent students, and then the board's job is to govern and adopt policy and adopt the budget and implement program and actually not implement, but adopt program. And you do the governance, you don't do the management, but you provide that overall leadership and the public face of the districts, and that is that nexus between community and district, and then together you work collaboratively to do that governance piece. And so there is, of course you represent the whole community that represents the whole student body, not just the folks that voted for you, but the entire community, because you represent all students. And so we ask, and as I'm sure I've told you, I'm a board member as well, and so it's important to ask these questions of ourselves as board members. Can every child show growth? What do we think about that? Can every child succeed? And by that, we don't mean at a certain level. We mean in their own way. Like, what does success look like for each individual student? And can they do that at do we believe that every child can succeed as a board member? We know that there are certain ways that we can predict outcomes by social factors. There is research behind the fact that like we can predict outcomes by social factors. Is that what we want? Do we want to be able to predict achievement and opportunity gaps by demographics? That's generally not what we want. And so when we work to address those gaps, because we look at disaggregated data, we're looking to narrow and eliminate those gaps. And then this is sort of a key question that is often a little provocative. What % of students not graduating is acceptable for your board, right? Like when we say we want 90% of graduation, are we saying it's okay if 10% of our students don't graduate? Of course that's not what we mean, but it's kind of turning the question up on its head. What % of students is okay? Now, sometimes when I get back on that is, yeah, but graduation is not the only metric. Of course it's not. We are talking about building the system up from underneath because education starts at pre-K. It starts before that, right? All kinds of research behind that. But when we build that system from the ground up, then we get kids that leave the system with that diploma. And so these are good questions to ask ourselves as board members as we do our work and think think about those big questions that we ask ourselves as we do the business of the district and the work of the board. So there's also, when I will explain that, when we do these kinds of trainings, we base our training, it's grounded in research. And we don't just do, hey, this is what OSBA thinks, or this is what Kristen thinks. All of our training is based in what does the research say that boards can do to impact student outcomes. And this is one of those pieces. There is a piece of research that showed that when all board members share the single belief that all students can learn, not achieve at a specified level or not get a certain score on a standardized test, but when all board members believe that all students can learn, that measurably impacted student outcomes in a positive way. And that may be sort of like well, sure, everybody would believe that, but that's not necessarily true. And if you think of the opposite, what would the opposite mean? If we don't necessarily believe that all students can really learn, that impacts the way that we make decisions. It impacts the way we vote. It impacts the way that we want to allocate money. It impacts the way that we see the importance of professional development and where we want that to go. It impacts the way that we adopt program. And it impacts all decision making and the lens through which we make our decisions. And the opposite is true. When we believe that all students can learn, that impacts our decision making as well. And so then there's that aspirational piece. Of course, all students can learn. That hope, that aspiration, and that belief also drives us toward our strategic priorities, right? And in your strategic priorities is an embedded belief of success and high expectations for all students. And so that belief drives you to push for those priorities to be met. So I want to go over a little bit about the leadership team of the district, because there are like defining factors for each area of the leadership team, and then there's overlap. There's the board. You have ultimate authority, essentially, and you provide the direction of the district. You build that with your superintendent, right? There's a very strong partnership there. You build that with your superintendent, and you provide oversight of many things. Not getting into the weeds, not providing strategies, but providing oversight. Then there's your superintendent. Your superintendent provides the leadership of the district, provides the implementation. He is your chief academic officer. He has that expertise piece that is so vital to providing you advice and counsel when you are making those big decisions, and does the implementation, does the action, right? And then there's some overlap there. There's this gray area where like you're partnering and you're doing that important work together. And an example of that is when you're building strategic priorities and doing the strategic plan piece, there are certain areas which are yours, certain areas which are his and his team's, and then certain areas which you do together. And then the last piece of that team is your administrative professional who does coordination, who is responsible for compliance, and likely knows all of those rules, and then continuity of the system between the board and the superintendent. Overall district leadership, that's the board and the superintendent together, right? That's that nexus, that's that overlap. Together you form that leadership duo. And governing body operations, that's going to be the board and the administrative professional, right? You are the governing body, and then the operations of that, that's your administrative professional. And the executive functions, the pieces that are the to-dos, that's going to be the overlap between the administrative professional and the superintendent. And then that piece in the middle, that's the leadership efficacy. Like, how successful are you in implementing all of these things? How does that team work together to provide good leadership and to make this a smooth operating functioning team that it can be in order to best serve students. Any questions on that? That's like a lot in that slide. Any thoughts or questions? Okay. So how do school boards impact students in general? You all come to this work as individuals with individual talents, individual ideas, individual thoughts of how you want to contribute. Together you work as a collective, and that's board work. And then you create the board culture, right? That is how you work together. What kind of environment do you create? That filters out into the rest of the organization. There are a lot of ways in which the board kind of sets the tone for the rest of the organization, particularly in smaller communities where the district may be kind of the hub of the wheel of a community or a really big part of a community. And you do a lot to set the tone. And then of course the organizational culture impacts the classroom. That impacts classroom instruction, which is the thing that impacts students the most. So there is absolutely a causal chain between board members, individual board members, but between the whole board and students. So what do high-performing boards do? What are the actions, the behaviors, and characteristics of high-performing boards? And what I have done here is take some of the really important research that came out that is still referenced today about what high-performing boards do, and tried to like put that in a matrix that says where it's all finding the same stuff. And how can that be categorized? So I just looked at 3 of these important studies that are still referenced today in a lot of literature. And what are these things pulling out time and time again? So high-performing boards set vision and goals, right? You're working on this, or you've done it as part of your strategic planning process. You are setting clear expectations, establishing that vision, and committing to high expectations as part of that vision. Working with the community, working with your superintendent, including staff in that community and any community partners to set that vision and then align goals to that vision, right? This is the strategic priorities, this is the strategic plan. High-performing boards have those. I work with a lot of boards that don't have that anchor, that don't have a plan or that anchor to like, what are we doing, what are we working on? We're not sure. We just, we're going through, we're looking at data year after year, but they don't have strategic priorities that they're aiming toward. Then the climate and resources piece is creating conditions for success so that the district can move toward meeting those strategic priorities. So part of that is sustaining and aligning resources to meet those goals. That means to the extent possible, shifting resources or using the resources you have, which is money, time, staff, toward meeting or working toward those strategic priorities and goals. It is also about climate. When you create conditions for success, there's a belief piece there. There's also a behavior piece there. You have to create a climate and encourage and expect schools to do that too, right? Students can't operate in an environment, they can't learn in an environment that's unwelcoming or unhealthy, and so creating conditions so that students can thrive is part of that. And creating a sense of urgency, right? Not that like these things have to be done now, but this is really important, and so that inspires people to work toward those goals. Data and monitoring, using data, obviously, knowing what's being measured, holding the system accountable and monitoring progress. So if you have a strategic plan, what data are you getting and at what points of the year to show that the district is making progress on those strategic priorities? Don't leave the process without having a monitoring plan. And this is another area of collaboration with your superintendent, where you're saying, okay, now that we know what the strategies are, not down to the, teeny tiny classroom pieces, because you're not gonna know that. But now that we know what the overall plan is, we as a board, how are we gonna track progress on this? What are you, superintendent and team, gonna bring us at what points of the year to show us progress on these goals, and then build it into your calendar, right? Like, it is hard to remember to track anything that isn't built into your calendar. So make sure you know like what and when and who. And then also, what might we do if goals are met? Like, do we jump to a next thing? Or what might we do if there's not progress in this way? Do we adjust it? Do we abandon it? Or do we modify it? Or do we keep going? Like, do we just keep testing? So those are things to talk about as you go. Cohesive teaming is one that keeps coming up. Learning as a board team, practicing unified governance, which does not mean uniform. It does not mean you all think the same way. It does not even mean you always all vote the same way. It just means that you have a relationship of trust and an established team. And so that when there is disagreement, it can be handled respectfully, and that nobody feels like if they vote no on something, they then go out and undermine the decision, right? Can you tell people you voted no on something? Sure. If they came to the board meeting, they would know that. But saying what you feel at the board table and then supporting the decision and the will of the board is very different than voting against something and then going out in the community and saying like, my fellow board members are gonna ruin the district because of, and then actively undermining something. So practicing those behaviors of trust for the rest of the board and having strong beliefs and shared values about your students and the system. Community engagement is a big one, building that public will, getting support from your community, and having collaborative relationships with the staff and community. A lot of two-way communication, so how do you receive input and how do you give information? There is no perfect secret sauce to this. I get asked, I was in a board retreat yesterday and I got asked like, what is the perfect way? Because we get told we communicate too much, then we communicate too little, and like, there's no perfect way to do this. No, there is not. But just keep engaging with the community. There's all kinds of things to try, and it is better probably to over-communicate than to under-communicate. And a lot of this the district will be responsible for, but ensuring that you understand how the district goes about getting voices to the table is important. And then policy and accountability. You are accountability driven, not operations driven, right? You're policy focused, not management focused. And that your inquiry is focused on student learning, not on management. Any questions or thoughts about any of these pieces? Nope. Okay. Okay. We talked about the other side too. So, because these are things we want to avoid. So these are research-based practices that we want to avoid because they are associated with more negative impacts on student outcomes. So, and some of these are pretty self-explanatory. Any meetings that are not orderly or have lack of respectful engagement, right? Any meetings where the board is just not getting along, right? And that is pretty obvious. Or any meeting where or series of meetings where some individuals are doing all the talking and nobody else gets any airtime, right? Are there gonna be meetings here and there? Sure. But if that is a pattern, that's one of those things that leads to some dysfunction. Less time spent on student achievement. So we all know that there is other business of the district that has to be done by the board, right? There are things where we've got to discuss the boiler contract. I mean, I know in my district we have to do that sometimes. We have to, we have to do things that are not solely about student outcomes. But when we spend as much time as possible talking about things that relate to student outcomes that are associated with what do we need to keep focusing on? It is student outcomes, that's why we're here. the more time we can spend on that, the better. Members seeking to advance their own agendas. And I want to draw a distinction here because we all get on the board with an interest, and it's okay to have an interest, right? Like some board members are like, I really want to ensure that that our special ed system is like super healthy, and that's great. Now, down to the management level, no, but wanting to be informed and wanting the board to be informed and wanting to see progress or data, I mean, that's great. Or being really interested in curriculum adoption. Okay, great. As long as that extends to all students. An agenda would be, I'm getting on the board to get this principal fired, right? That's an agenda. And so somebody getting on board to advance an agenda, that clearly leads to negative outcomes, not only on the board, but like it does lead to negative student outcomes as well. And there is some research that shows that boards getting professional development mitigates the impact of personal agendas. And that's probably obvious as to why. The more you learn about your board role, the less likely you are to have a personal agenda because you realize, oh, that's not what we do here. That's not the role of the board. Having less effective working relationships, that's kind of part and parcel of the meetings being less orderly. If you've got working relationships with your partners on the board, that's going to be better for kids. Less reliance on the administrator for advice and input. So again, your superintendent is your chief academic officer. And when we're not reliant on our chief academic officer for advice and input about student outcomes, that leads to negative student outcomes because we're not using our main resource. And less focus on policy items, and by that we mean governance, right? So when we're too invested in management and not focused enough on governance. The other study that covered this is if we're only vaguely aware of what's going on at school. We don't want to be in management, but we also want to know what's going on. Like we want you as board members to have all of the information that you need in order to make the big decisions that you need to make. We don't want you in the dark. Like we don't want you rubber stamping. Like we want you to have important information that you need. And if you're only vaguely aware of what's happening in the district, you don't have the important information that you need in order to make big decisions. So when you're only vaguely aware, then we're not making smart decisions or asking good questions. Making excuses or externalizing things. Can we control 100% of things that are happening in students' lives? Of course not. But there's a difference between that and saying like, if only those kids, or if only we didn't have this, or if only, or blaming students as the cause for lower performance or data we don't like. That impacts students. Micromanagement, which I mentioned, when staff don't know the board, or I don't mean personally, but like what the board does or who the board is, there's a disconnect there. And then anecdotes and personal experiences driving decisions instead of data. And by that, I mean, do we all come to the table with experiences? Sure. I'm a parent in my district. I have personal experiences all over the place. But like, we can't let an experience make decisions that impact the entire student body and the whole district. I'm gonna stop there. Any questions or thoughts? Okay. So the big, broad governance and management distinction, you adopt policy, and then the management side, your superintendent side, implements that policy and has ARs or administrative regulations that are more detailed sometimes. You don't have ARs for everything, but that give the implementation instructions for the policy. You adopt the budget, management gets to spend the budget. You adopt programs, and then management gets to implement programs, and there's a theme here. You adopt curriculum, and management and team sometimes makes the recommendation to you for what curriculum to adopt. Usually there's a whole process involved in that. Both sides do community engagement in different ways sometimes, and sometimes there's an overlap there, like if there's a listening session or obviously public comment is one way to get community engagement, but there are often events to go to, or showing up here, or tabling there, or again, listening sessions, or getting emails from constituents, that kind of thing. As long as it's not like, representing special interests or individual people, like we have to be careful about what community engagement looks like, but both sides are doing community engagement. And then being informed and doing that monitoring, and your management side is providing you that data and information to do that monitoring and provide that oversight. So balanced governance then is, we don't want you disengaged and rubber stamping. We don't want you doing micromanagement. We want you to have that informed oversight piece. And that does take some balance and it can take some practice, but when you're working with your superintendent and having that relationship where you can truly talk about like, that feels like an overstep, or I want you to know more. Like, I want you to ask these questions before you make a decision. And then there is a healthy tension that you can really achieve that balance in a good way, so that like you're asking all the good questions before you make decisions. How do we get there? So I will go quickly through these standards because we don't have a ton of time. But there are these balanced governance standards, and there are 12 of them. And I can send you these slides afterwards so you can read them in more detail if you would like. But one is that vision-directed planning, and that looks like a strategic plan, where the vision is clear and shared and student-focused, and decisions are connected to that. The second one is community engagement, where you're listening actively to voices from across the district, including folks that don't usually come to the table because there's a barrier there. And engagement is not just one time, it's ongoing and constantly looking for who are we not hearing from. Effective leadership is you focusing on student outcomes, respecting roles, and holding yourself accountable to agreements that you have, like a board superintendent agreement or a board operating agreement, and demonstrating that effective leadership to the community and to the rest of the district. And then accountability on this page, where your goals are measurable and they are monitored. You use data to adjust the direction when you need to and ensure progress. This is that monitoring plan piece that I was talking about. I'm going to pause there and say, are there any, as you're looking at this here, that you feel like this board is particularly good at?
I'm squinting.
Yeah.
Oh.
Our board does a very good job, I believe, with a lot of these standards. We are working still, I think, on engaging the community. And, there's kind of a fine line when you talk about engaging staff, because the board's position is, it's an awkward position when a staff member comes to you with a complaint and you, naturally refer to the superintendent. But,
Yes.
you're placed in at least I feel I'm in an awkward position.
Yes. Yeah, and complaints have to be handled through the complaint process, right? And so engaging staff in a proactive, positive, like how do we get feedback as we look at initiatives or a strategic plan or something like that, or just, how is XYZ going, is different than, do staff understand that we can't act individually on something, or we are the last stop and not the first. We can't handle individual complaints, right? And then there's that whole, like, having a little speech in your back pocket ready to talk about, I hear you, I hear you're frustrated, thanks for talking to me, here's the process, right? Because that can be super tricky when we get a complaint. You hear that? Is there anything here that the board would, want to work on a little bit more?
Kristen, I'd like to step back to when you were talking about high-performing boards.
Yeah.
And you indicated that the board set goals and set vision. You know, to me, that is all the board kind of sets the culture of the district. And the monitoring piece becomes, you know, we've got to look at what we're doing and such. At least that's how I look at it, you know. I guess I like the broader word culture because it indicates so much more. And then going back to where you were talking about, I guess it would be the governance team or the leadership team with the board, the superintendent, and the administrative professionals. Let's go a little deeper into that. What do board members, or what is the position of board members when they recognize that someone on their board team is being extraordinarily difficult?
So there are a couple of ways to handle this. Not an unusual question. So a couple of ways to handle this. Often there is, so if somebody pops up and, you know, it's difficult and it remains difficult, if there is an opportunity for the board, well, first of all, is there an operating agreement in place? And if there is, it is great in real time for anybody on the board to reference the operating agreement in a board meeting. And I will say that, like, it is a super low stakes thing to be able to sort of like nip these things in the bud if it's possible. And I'm going to take a number of different paths, but like this is the easy one. If it's possible to say, you know, our operating agreement, which we keep at the table with us, many boards do, says that, you know, we agreed to do X, Y, Z, and I just want to bring our attention back to that. A lot of times that will work and not go any further. Or I just want to remind us that, like, we're dipping into a little bit of management here, and our job is to stay at policy if, you know, if that's maybe something. Great, that can turn a conversation around. If there is a theme, or if that's not working, or if it's something more serious than that, then often the board chair will have an individual conversation with a board member if it is more serious than that. So that is one of the duties of the board chair, is to kind of, you know, manage behavior that can't be managed at the board table in round one. And so, so that can happen. If that conversation doesn't go well, or as hoped, or isn't effective, and that continues, then all of this next conversation has to happen in public. There can sort of be an official revisiting of either the board operating agreement, if you have one, or just a talk about how we behave. And that's in public, you know, either at a work session, or at a work session, or an agenda item on a board meeting about the expectations of our board and how we operate. It's better to have an operating agreement, so that can be like an external thing to refer to, and that's the focus. But it can be about, we're not functioning super well right now. Like, we all need to focus on this, right? It's always better not to make somebody feel pointed at, but let's, you know, let's try and get some agreement. Let's try and get some commitments to that.
Okay,
And-
on the board operating agreement, which we do have one, if we want to add something to that, does that have to be done in an open session, and it has to be a motion item?
Yes, it does. Yep, all of that's public session. And then, you know, what we say in the end is, keep the rest of the board strong, right? I mean, if there is a member of the board that it's really difficult, like, we've got to keep the rest of the board strong and together. together and committed to having that relationship that is trusting and solid, and again, not best friendy, it doesn't have to be like that, but that is functional and collaborative with the superintendent. And we can't force anybody to adhere to policy. We can't force them to adhere to an operating agreement. We can keep inviting in, and we can keep, approaching things in a way that does not make anybody feel alienated. But like, that's what we can do. And in the end, if that doesn't work, we got to keep the rest of the board strong.
Okay, if there's someone in the administrative team that the board recognizes is being a detriment, that is it something we should take to the superintendent?
Yes, yeah, superintendent is your only employee, and so if there's a concern about anybody else that's on staff, that goes to the superintendent.
And if we're unhappy with the superintendent's response?
If the board is unhappy with the way the superintendent is managing, then that's an evaluation discussion, right? Like, it does not mean that the board steps in and makes any decisions that the superintendent would make. It means that, does that mean that there is a performance issue there, or something that the board needs to, look at it as, what is the underlying issue? It's not, is it a single decision, or is there a concern? Is there a management concern, right? And so, if there is an evaluation discussion to be had about something, and I'm just making things up, obviously, the board can have an evaluative conversation with the superintendent. If it is evaluative in nature, you can have it in executive session and talk about a standard that the board is concerned about. Again, it would have to meet the criteria of executive session, and I would get legal advice on that, call PACE. But you can have that discussion if it is a concern about performance, right? So, but that all goes to the superintendent if you're concerned about the superintendent's decision making.
So question for you, just as a superintendent, right? Say I have an issue with Maribel, she smiles too much. It's not okay, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
would you say, would the operating, really would you say that my place is to go to the chair and the vice chair and say, hey, I do have some concerns about that? Or is it just go directly, even though we're not talking about the whole board, maybe it's not the feeling, where is that in bounds and out of bounds? I know a lot of it, the chairperson and vice chair, we have a lot of communication, but you kind of see where I'm saying, where do I fall in on how do I give feedback?
Yeah. Ideally, and I think this is good for communication protocols as well. So that's another thing we recommend as tools for collaboration is a communication protocol. Ideally, the superintendent would be able to talk to any individual board member, not to take direction from them, because no individual board member gets to give direction to the superintendent, right? Even the chair. But ideally, if the superintendent had a disagreement or needed to chat with an individual board member, it wouldn't have to go through somebody else to air that grievance before they went to that board member. Ideally, there is a relationship between the superintendent and the board where I want to solve my problem at the most local level, just like your policy KL, and the most local level is for me to address it with the person that I have the issue with, just like policy KL, right? And that would be ideal. If the board and the superintendent agree that there needs to be a more formal structure and that's not okay, and the superintendent needs to go through the chair to do that, not ideal, but if that's the agreed upon structure, then that's what it is, right? But that is not, in my opinion, that is not the most trusting of relationships necessarily, unless that really works for you, right? I can't say that there's a bad way and a good way, but our hope is generally that you can solve your problem first, or at least try, with the person that that there is some tension with. And then if that doesn't work, then you go to the chair and say I'm having having a really hard time with this, I need you to help me step in. If there's a lot of confusion or tension about how do I get my problem solved and I don't know how to do it, I really do honestly recommend communication protocols that actually line that out. Like, who do I go to if I have a problem? You know, whatever. I mean, there's a lot of things that can go in communication protocols, but that would be an expectation one as well.
Thank you.
Another question, you know, and possibly it's just because I have an expectation that all board members will review information that's given them. How do you address that with a board member who never looks at the information that's provided?
Oh my gosh, Pat, are you talking about me?
Again?
Again? I'm just kidding.
I went through the chair. No.
And do you mean like preparing for a board meeting, like reading board packet in advance?
Oh, yeah, board packets.
Or anything,
Or
yeah.
anything. I mean, you know, there are a few things that come out from the superintendent that aren't on the board packet, but they're information items that are, they are important.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, if it feels like there is a board member who is not reviewing material, who is not prepared not only for meetings, but who is, you know, behind in information in general, and so like has a hard time making decisions or keeping up because of the fact that like they're not keeping up with the information that comes out, they're not reading emails from the superintendent, whatever, or the weekly updates, or whatever, are the expectations. I think it is the chair's responsibility to have a talk. Like that is, you know, not easy being a chair. That's why I didn't want to be the chair of my board. You know, like, it kind of falls to the chair first. Now, to take a little pressure off the chair, anybody who feels a certain way about anything should feel empowered to address the thing, right? Like, especially, so I'm gonna just bird walk just for a second, especially in the moment, right? If you're at a board meeting and somebody like totally steps, or even a little bit, out of line and like is either off topic or saying something that's a little inflammatory and is sort of, you know, or saying something inappropriate, or is doing something that violates your board operating agreement or policy, or has taken the agenda in a completely different direction, or is, you know what I mean, like doing something that's not great behavior, that should not fall solely on the chair to correct in the moment. Anybody should be able to say, you know, point of order, or however you manage your meetings. I would just like to draw us back to, or I want to remind us that, you know, we have these rules. I mean, if anything, you've probably got policy BBF, which is your standards of conduct, even if you don't have a board operating agreement. And I just want to remind us that, like, we should act in whatever, and in a kind response to that. It should not always fall to the chair. Anybody should feel empowered to speak up in you know, defense of the board. Also, I would say the same thing for a behind the scenes talk, right? Like, if I on my board felt like, gosh, it's really tough to work with somebody who is like, who never, like, is never prepared for a discussion. Like, should I be able to call them up and have a chat? Yeah, I should. If I've got a relationship with them where I could, sure. Now, ultimately, probably falls to the chair, but if there is a relationship that has been built where, again, folks can address their own problems first, that's ideal. These are great questions. Anything else?
Susie, Jasmine, Maribel, any questions?
Okay, let's skip ahead. Close your eyes if this is like too many flipping around. Okay. All right, the next standards, and I am watching the time, I know we're gonna end at 6. The next 4 standards are using data for continuous improvement. This goes right along with standard 4, which was monitoring for accountability. This is about using multiple sources of data and clear data to guide decisions. And when I say data, I don't just mean student performance data, I just mean information, right? That could be financial data, it could be like community survey data, it could be anything. As long as you know what it is that is being reported, you know what's being measured, and you know, one of the pieces of this standard is high quality data from multiple sources if you can get it, right? And so when we look at academic achievement data, like, are we looking at like just standardized testing, like state testing, or are we also looking at how does the district do measuring? Do you do growth metrics? Do you do other kinds of, like, how does the district say, here's how we measure success here? Cultural response, yep, did somebody say something? Maybe I was just echoing, okay. Cultural responsiveness is standard 6. So looking at the acknowledgement that students come to you in many different ways, and part of our job is to reduce and eliminate barriers to access. The board reviews disaggregated data to look at gaps between students, academic and opportunity gaps, and elevates underrepresented voices, looks at, again, who's at the table, who's not at the table, who does this positively impact, who does this negatively impact when making big decisions. Culture and climate, the board models respect, the board recognizes success in ensuring a safe environment for everybody and creates that climate of expectations that all students can learn. That filters out through the whole district. It really does, and we talked about that in that high achieving boards one. And then being a learning organization. So that self-renewing, self-reflecting, you know, we expect our teachers to do professional development. We should expect that of ourselves. We expect the superintendent to do it. You know, this is just a continuous cycle of learning for all, and so a regular cadence of reflection and learning. I will ask the same thing here. Are there any things here that you feel like you do particularly well?
You know, we're working on getting better at using data.
Mm-hmm.
We really are, and I think that's just one of those ongoing things that needs to happen. And, you know, as board members, we all have other jobs. And so when you get this other information and this data, sometimes it takes a while to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I
I hear you about the other job thing.
I would look at number 8 as a strength of our board, promoting that within our district, right? I mean, but also our board does a really good job in general of trying to they go to Bend, they go to Portland, you know, trying to do those things to further themselves, because we know that that's a large commitment. But I think, especially everybody's here, is like you constantly are trying to learn, what do we need to do, what do we need to do? And so I would, that for me is one of my favorite parts of the board, is that they're constantly learning. You know, I came to the board the other day and said, hey, I'm going to take some PD courses on some AI stuff. They're like, absolutely, go for it, right? I mean, and they really do promote the learning as far as themselves and the organization. So I'm saying that's a strength of your guys'.
That's great.
thank you. One of the other things that NISA is one school district in Malheur County. There are several others. And Susie and I have talked about trying to get more communication with the other school boards so that Malheur County, which is a huge county, can leverage some more of these educational opportunities for our students and our staff. You know, this is something that we've talked about, and I do not know what the best way to reach out to these other school boards is. I mean, there seems to be reluctance for board members to talk to other board members.
Have you tried through your regional rep? like your OSBA regional rep?
Yeah, so last year we were, during the regional meetings, that have those, that was gonna be our kind of platform to jump off into like coming and creating, hey, let's create some more opportunities for us to get together, not just when we do the roadshow.
Yeah.
And, because everybody's in the room and do that, but obviously we had some issues last year with it, but I think that's still something that we, as the board says, let's start using each other as a resource. And
Yeah.
so that's, we kind of have a plan for that. So,
Mhm.
yeah, and it's kind of weird as our landscape with, we're a very big county, but very small as well, and there's a lot of rivalries, and we have to get over that and say, how can we help each other be resources? Because it's, you're from our, anyway, but we're working on it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if your regional reps can be helpful at all, like they know that's their job. There's the whole like email my region tool within your account, but like that's part of the regional rep's job is to try and connect folks in the region. So if they can be, I don't have that in front of me right now, but like if they can be helpful, hopefully they would. I don't know who it is right now, but that might be, a resource, or, if I can be helpful, like, I'm happy
It's
to.
a guy from LeGrand now, isn't it?
Yeah, because it was Chris,
Yeah,
but
Chris
she's.
Stroman, and now it's,
Oh, Chris?
Yeah,
she was, and now it
was.
says the new gentleman.
But now there's a new one, and I've not met him.
What was his name, Susan?
Somebody from
Mark.
Grand.
Yeah, it's from LeGrand.
Is his name Mark?
Mark?
No, I don't remember. Yes.
Anyway, somebody from LeGrand.
He looks like Mark.
He definitely.
Well, let me know if I can be helpful in that way as well, because like, collaboration between districts is always wonderful, right? Like, everybody's got something to offer, and anytime we can support that kind of collaboration, we're happy to help. Last set of standards is systems thinking. That's thinking of, obviously the district as a whole, even in a small system, like it's still the sum of its parts, or it's bigger than the sum of its parts, rather. And when you're doing systems thinking, you're, a strength over here, let's see how we can leverage it for the whole system, and then we're not taking a problem here and just moving it over here. What is the long-term impact? What is the effect of, what is the cross-departmental or cross-district effect of decisions as we make them? Innovation and creativity is the fun one, right? Like, how do we think about seemingly intractable problems in different ways? How do we think about new problems in different ways than we maybe thought we could before? And then also looking at impact before expanding new things, before eliminating things. I think one of this sounds negative, it's not. One of the biggest pieces of innovation that I see districts do is actually strategic abandonment, right? It is bold to say, this is not working, we're gonna give it up and try something else, because that takes creativity and innovation and boldness to be able to say, we're gonna let this go and do a new thing because it just did not get us the results that we were looking for. And so that, like, not to say that's willy-nilly all the time, but to look at the ROI of an initiative and be willing to say, we're gonna keep trying, and we're gonna abandon this thing because, like, we've got something that we know is more, like, we've thought about the old problem in a new way. Board member conduct, ethics, and relationship with the superintendent. That's roles and responsibilities, essentially. That's the old form of roles and responsibilities. So that's governance and management. That's exactly what we went through earlier. Knowing that those roles are clear, the board follows its protocols. Obviously, there's always that gray area, but the gray area can be negotiated because there's a trusting relationship. And then finally, budgeting and financial accountability. The board is good stewards of the public funds, and the budget aligns with the strategic priorities, and spending is student focused to the extent possible. You're doing everything you can to align to the strategic goals of the district. And I'll ask the same thing in here. Anything that particularly resonates with you or you feel like you're doing particularly well?
I think the innovation and creativity just like brought the calendar to mind. How many times are we like tabling the calendar with, what about this, and what about this, and can we see this? And Ryan is just so good at just like, okay, I hear what you're saying, let me see how I can make it work.
I don't roll my
So,
eye.
so I think with the calendar, it's like the back and forth between the board and the superintendent, it, like, I can see how that relationship goes back and forth with that point there.
Talk about creativity as well, right? Is like,
Mm-hmm.
we know what our goals are and we had to be innovative. I mean, it was a really like, I mean, I don't know, I think it was you or said, why don't we just do the first 5 weeks? And then all of a sudden it was like, done, right? I mean, things just parted and it worked really, really well because of that innovation, but that's how we work, right? Is like, anyway, that's a great example. So, yeah, we're good at that. Budgeting and financial accountability. Yeah, we're in a really good place.
That's good. That's great.
Don't tell other districts that, but we're in a really good place. Yeah.
That's good. Be jealous.
Yeah.
I want to, I know we've just got a few minutes left, so I'm gonna like flip through things really quickly again because we didn't get to this scenario. It's okay. I just want to run through really quickly tools for collaboration that I would recommend. A really strong superintendent evaluation process. I don't know if you've got one of these. If you don't, we have a free tool that we use for superintendent evaluation, and it's on the website. You may already use it. If you do, ignore me. If you don't, again, tools on the website. We also facilitate that process. But no matter what you do, the process should be both accountability and support. This can be a real relationship building process. I'm happy to talk more about that at some other point if that's something that you're interested in building or modifying. A board self-assessment is an important thing, and we did that, so we don't have to talk about that again. Board operating agreement, we've been talking about that the whole time. A board superintendent operating agreement is the same thing, except on both sides, right? And where it would be like the board's expectations of the superintendent, this is beyond job description, and the superintendent's expectations of the board as well. And so that can be a really nice thing to have side by side, again, at the board table, where both parties feel like, hey, you know, this is, again, accountability and support and relationship building and partnership. And then those communication protocols that I mentioned. And so one of those examples is, who do I talk to? Like, if I've got a problem with somebody, can I just, you know, talk to them directly? Another communication protocol that, you know, I use as an example is, hey, if there's an emergency, like, how does Ryan communicate that out? Like, there may be somebody that expects a text, somebody that expects a call, somebody that expects an email. Like, he can't do all of those things at once if he needs to be on the ground dealing with an emergency. So, like, what is the one expectation that he will fulfill until he can get back to all of you in a different way with more detail, right? So things like that, where there are, you know, a lot of you expecting something. Have you talked about, like, what is the one thing you can all expect that your superintendent can deliver on? Because, you know, it's hard to have multiple expectations coming from multiple people. And so, and also, like, what if we want to visit classrooms? Do we have to check with him about that? Do we check with the principal? Like, I mean, how does that work? So coming up with communication protocols. Clarity is kindness, right? And anything that you can be clear on is always going to serve you better. In the 2 minutes we have left, are there any questions or anything you need from me?
Can we get a copy of your slide deck by chance? Because I
Yes,
think there's some things in
absolutely.
there, like
Yes.
I saw some of the role play things that would actually be fun
Yeah.
for us to do, and but there's 3 of us that aren't here, and I think it would be good to go through that, but if that's possible, so thank you. I don't know if
Yeah,
it's proprietary.
I will send that to you, absolutely.
Yeah.
That'd be great, that'd be great. And just before you leave, can you just give us a quick, where is OSBA on this cell phone policy thing? I know you're working on it, I know the group is working on it.
writing policy. So, Spencer is working really closely with ODE because they will be, writing the rules. And I think everybody's just working really furiously on that because the timeline is super tight. And so it's just a hand in hand, like as soon as rules are being written, like we've got to come out with policy. And so that's a hand in hand thing. And we will have information about that. I don't know if any of you are coming to summer board, but we are going to have both a presentation and a hot topic table at summer board with ODE there. So, and then of course we'll have more news about that, even if you're not coming to summer board, right? Like it'll be in newsletters and all kinds of things, and of course in policy update. But that is like one of the big things that Spencer and his team will be working on is policy update.
I thought it was kind of neat that your first slide had the student with the cell phone in hand. Wait,
Not in class though.
I'm like, was this on purpose?
But not in class, on the weekend, at home.
A question on that, just why we got you on here, is, are you seeing boards right now that are having these kind of community forums, events occurring? Because that's where we're looking at getting something like that set up. Are you seeing that around, or is everybody just kind of waiting for policy, OSBA? I mean, what are you seeing out there?
I don't know of anybody that is, it is done, like it is set, right? Like everybody is just waiting for that I have seen, and it's so new, like I don't know that I would have seen everything yet, but like because the executive order is out and because everybody's just waiting for policy now, I don't see right now anybody taking any additional like public comment or public feeling about it because there's nobody to testify to anymore, right? Like legislature's out, it's already done, it's decided. Now ODE is working furiously and we've got to adopt policy. So I haven't seen any additional like solicitation of public input or anything like that. Now, I've seen like newsletters go out about like, hey, this is the thing, but it's kind of simple right now, right? Like we know that this is the big statement. More info to come on exactly what that means later. Because, there's a whole bunch of question marks, as you well know, as to like, okay, what does discipline mean in this case? Is it bell to bell in high school? Is it like, are there any, I know all the questions involved in that, but I've seen a lot of like more info later, and we may see more like community events later about like, okay, now we'll gather and give you like all the details we have, but right now it's just like, here's what we know, more to come.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all.
Okay.
Have a great night, Kristen.
You too.
Thank you,
Bye.
Kristen.
Meeting adjourned.
Okay. Any questions, anything else? This meeting then is adjourned.